Okay, for this project, you'll wrap your either makeup brush wrap or pencil wrap, whichever you want to use it for. You'll need 1 fat quarter. So if you're going for the cotton ones, which I have, my cotton ones come up quite wide, so you'll be able to get 2 wraps out of 1 fat quarter. So as long as you cut it carefully, that is. So you'll need 1 for the backing. You'll need another piece for where your pencils or your makeup brushes go in, and then you'll need 1 for your liner. So you've got 1 fat quarter that will do your outers and your pockets, and then 1 piece that will do your liner in there. I've gone for a darker one because obviously makeup brushes leave marks. Right, you'll also need some ribbon. Okay, I've got 90 centimetres in this one, but about 1 metre, will probably be about best. Right, you then also need your pattern. So this pattern obviously I've made up, and what I've done is, if you haven't got an A2 or A3, sorry, sheet of paper, you can just put 2 pieces of A4 together. So I've taken A4 paper, and this is actually quite a good tip. If you want something square and you haven't got, like I have, the French curves, which have got the angles on them, if you're just going to use a ruler, then this is a really good tip to make your edges quite square. So if you put 2 of the sheets together, button them up, but actually make sure that they sit on top of one another perfectly. So those 2 lines, and then you put the sellotape or the masking tape, whichever you're going to use, putting them together. So I've done them like so. So I've actually lined it up really carefully so I know this top edge is perfectly straight. Okay, so you need to cut your shape. So this one is 14 inches by 9 inches, otherwise in centimetres, 36 centimetres by 23 centimetres, okay, and 2 A4 sheets will fit into that perfectly. Okay, so once you've done that, so I've also written on there a note of how much ribbon I need, and I've actually worked out roughly where I want my placements for my pockets to go, for my brushes to go in. But I'll show you how I did that in a second. So with my pattern, I've laid out and cut my 2 shapes, okay, my 2 my linings and my backings. So one of them, I have put an interfacing in them. I've actually put a lightweight interfacing to medium, so it's a medium one. I use heavy, but I prefer to go with a medium for this one. This one is actually the outer layer. So the backing layer is actually got the interfacing on it. So next, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do my pockets first. So I'm going to take my other piece of fabric, fold it in half like so, and just give it a quick press across. Now this is where you've got to make sure on your pattern that you have cut it accurately and square, because otherwise you're going to find your edges aren't actually going to join, your edges there aren't actually going to join up, and it won't be square, because you need this edge to be quite square. So with my bumblebees all sorted and pressed into place, now you can either mark off with a pen or chalk or anything else that you like to use. I sometimes use the invisible pens, which I do actually stock. But obviously with a lot of the projects right now, we want to make them as cheap as possible. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use pins. Now, on my template, I've written off the spacing down the bottom here. I've already worked out what spacing that I want for each of my channels. So, and obviously allowing the fact that I've got to put a taper around the edge, or a seam, and also I'm going to put a taper around the edge. So my first pocket here is actually 5 centimetres. By the time I've actually taken my seam allowance off, and I've only allowed myself a centimetre seam allowance on these, time I've taken that off and put my channel around it, the pocket becomes quite slim. The same at the other end. This one I've actually only done as a 4, because then it just allows me to just put a tiny makeup brush or just even a pencil in there. Alright, but channels obviously depend on, if you want to put pencils in there, obviously your channels might want to be a little bit smaller. Anyway, right, so using my template just literally as to tell me where everything's going, what I could do is actually put a nodule on each of these and then mark as I go along. Okay, so taking my rule, I've actually done this slightly different. I'm not going to use the nodules on there, so if you actually marked off there, you could actually pin all the way down. But I haven't, I've done it slightly different, which isn't a problem. It's just a little bit more time consuming, to be honest. Right, so my first one I've decided is going to be 5 centimetres. So from my outer edge, I'm going to do 5 centimetre pin. Next one, 4 centimetre. My next one I want as 3 centimetres. My next one as 4 centimetres. My next as 5 centimetres. And next one 4 centimetres. 3 centimetres. And finally 4 centimetres there. So that last little channel will be 4 centimetres. I'm then going to also further down do the same spacing. So it's going to be 5 centimetres there and 4 centimetres there. The only thing I'll say as I'm doing this, always start from one edge, okay, and lead that way, because I've got two channels, because if it's off, it will be off at this end and it won't be a major issue. So if you've only got 0.5 centimetre, you know, less than your 4 centimetres because your cutting isn't perfect, it won't matter because it's the same all the way down, okay. Or if you're but I've just tried to make mine as even as possible, so all the pockets are done by centimetre rather than 0.5 centimetres. Okay, so lastly we've got 5, 4, last couple 3, and finally should be a 4. There we go, so there's the 4. Right, so like I say, you could always mark these down now you've got your pins in, or if you've got French curves, because they've all got the markings there, you can actually just move down from each line and actually draw your lines in, but I'm preferring to do it this way. So now I've got all my pins in, and you'll know from some of my other videos that quite often I do stuff like this. So where your pins are, I'm getting my iron out, I'm going to line up those pins, okay, remove them and put an iron mark across there. I've now got my mark in place. Now if I move away from this now, or have to go and deal with the kids or the dog or something else, somebody turns up at the door, you know, I'm not going to lose my invisible marker that's going to disappear after a certain amount of time. I can actually come back to this project whenever I want to. So going all the way down, I'll put the iron there actually, you can roughly see what I'm doing. So I'll probably speed up this little bit of the video so you can see. So my press lines, oops, move my iron, so you can see my press lines all the way along. So now you can see all my press lines are in place. Alright, so now getting your backing fabric. Now if you want to wad, I'll put wadding in your fabric, I would suggest you put it onto this piece, okay, purely because then it's secured when you actually sew through these sections as well, your brush sections. So I would cut it to size. You can actually get an iron-on wadding. I've tried to get it, but it is actually quite expensive. So, but normal wadding works perfectly fine. You can also get a spray that actually fixes stuff, and it's called a 505 spray, and it's a tacky spray, but the tack does dissolve eventually. It's something that I have looked into, and I'm can't get it for the store necessarily, but it is something that I might invest into personally. So if you're going to put the wadding on it, just give it a little, attach that first and put yourself a little holding stitch all the way around. That can be done by hand, but I'll just stick it around with a sewing machine. The other thing is with wadding, I would press it first in between some cotton. You could use these before you do so. And what it does is just squishes down the pile that little bit and actually makes it that little bit tougher. But mainly because the fibres in it are, because it's polyester, they just flatten out and melt a little bit, but actually they work really well. Right, anyway, so my next thing that I'm going to do, be it you've wadded it or not, is I'm going to attach my pockets. Now for me to do this, you can still see my lines, and I'm just going to pin it at this section and at the bottom, and then I'm going to pin it at each of the pocket points, so all the way down. I always use these plastic headed pins, but it doesn't really matter. I like plastic headed pins purely because you can hold them that much easier. They are a little bit more expensive, but they are definitely worth it because you're not rooting around on your pin cushion trying to desperately try to grab or get hold of the end of the metal ones. Right, so I will speed through this. Right. So it's all pinned into place, and the next thing that I'm going to do is sew all the way round and just put all my holding bits in place. Now the way that I've done it with this one is actually starting at the end. I have gone up, back down, up, back down, and it actually strengthens the pocket. But the one mistake that I made, and this was the first one that I did, and if you can see it very closely, is this one I didn't actually take right to the end. I would suggest that you take it right up to the end, because then there's no pulling away. This one I just feel will tear that little bit easier because it actually isn't holding the end of fabric in place. So I'd make sure that you do that. All right, so I'm just going to go off now and sew all my channels in and then come back. Right, so it's all been sewn, so I've gone up and down the channels. Don't need to worry too much about how perfect the bottom is, because obviously that's inside your stitching. Once I've done that, I'm just going to give it a quick press over. I think because I've left my iron, it's decided to turn itself off a little bit. So it's not as hot as it probably should be. Obviously, I say this every time, if you're going with the cottons, you can keep it on a nice hot iron. If you're using poly cotton, just be really careful not to put it on too hot an iron, because the poly cotton will shrink. Okay, it just melts all the fibres and draws them all together. Okay, so I'll put that back in there. This time I've got a ribbon, but I've actually decided to go with a slightly different colour, purely because if I'm giving them out as gifts, and if they are siblings, they obviously don't want the same colour bag. And also I just quite like a different colour. Right, so what I'm going to do is, because of the way the bag is going to be wrapped, and I've decided that I want it on this edge, you're going to put your ribbon in here like so. I've actually pulled it at a slight angle so you get that twist on it, and then I'm going to pop it just on that seam there. Okay, and I've lost my pin cushion now, so going to just pin that into place to start off with. Oops. Like so. And then I'm going to get my other piece of fabric, which has actually got the wadding on it, or sorry, this one's got the interlining on it, and just lay it straight over the top as like that. Alright, so everything, because you've obviously cut your pattern perfectly, it will all line up beautifully. I'm then going to pin all the way around it and then poke these in as well, but I'm not going to poke those in till afterwards as I'm sewing it, because I want it as flat as possible in order to get that nice square shape in it, or rectangle shape. So I'm just going to pin all in place, all the way around. So, and at this point, I'm going to leave, when I come to sewing, I'm actually going to leave this bit at the end here open so I can actually turn it through. You can do it at the top or bottom, but I just prefer to do it on the side. And as long as your sewing's really neat and carefully done, it's not an issue. So I'm going to just put the last of the pins there. You might want to put a few more in. Put one more down here. And one more just on this section. So my next thing that I'm going to do, starting off at this point, I'm going to sew all the way around to here and then back again. I'm actually going to make that channel a little bit wider. It's just enough so you can actually turn it through. I'm going to use a 1cm seam, so I'm actually going to use a tiny seam allowance on that to go all the way around. All right, and then I'll come back to you. Now you've done with your sewing, so you can see that I've just sewn all the way around the edge, leaving that part open and actually my ribbons through it. So next thing that I'm going to do, and I don't always do this, quite often I will fold my pieces and push them through, but it's quite bulky in that corner. So what I'm actually going to do is snip off the corner as much as I can. I'm not going to take it all the way up to the end, but because you've got those holding stitches on it, it will hold in place quite well. So I've just taken, if you can see, just cut off the corner there. I'm then going to fold those edges in as I normally do, and the other edge, and then getting hold of the actual lining, so pushing that, I'm going to push through that triangle so you get that nice square edge on it, like so. So I'm going to do the same with all the corners. Obviously that one's going to be slightly more bulky because you've got your extra fabric in there as well. And again, hold of my liner fabric. I'm going to push those corners through. And with this one, through, and lastly this one. You see they again, they are slightly bulkier. You will find your corners will be up the top definitely sharper, but down the bottom they might have a slight roll on them. Okay, so now we can actually turn the whole thing through. So now it's through. You can see the corners aren't actually too bad, all right, but we're just going to give those a little helping hand to be pulled out properly. So getting myself a nice size needle, so I've actually gone with a darning needle, and then I'm just going to put the needle into the end of it and just pull it out that little bit more so you get that nice square corner, just like so. Same with this one. Like I say, these top ones are going to be a lot more square than the bottom ones because it's not so bulky. And then this last one, these last couple down at the bottom, oops. So as you can see, they're that little bit bulkier. There's one. And then there's the other, just like so. Pushing those out nicely, so they're actually, if you can see that, not too bad. Just going to pull this one out that little bit more as well. Alright, so once they're all done and you're happy with those, next thing you're going to do is just give it a nice press. So I normally do this by rolling my fabric, so I push it towards me, try and hold it open flat a little bit, and then I roll it back out. So you can literally just roll into the correct place, and then as I'm going along, I will give it a press. this done. Next one, and obviously because you've got your seam open on this one, so you need to make sure that your seam is nice and flat, and any loose threads, just give them a tug and just push them in. So try and make this one as square as possible, because sometimes it can go slightly off and then it looks like there is a seam there. So bring that in, give it a pull. If you give it a pull quite often, it will go a nice straight edge anyway. That one. Down. Now that's pressed. Give it a nice good press from the other side. Now this is, it's up to you. Now I quite like the idea of this just showing along the edge here. It's up to you if you want to just push it further round so you don't actually see it. But like I say, I quite like the idea of seeing it around the edge. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. A nice good press flattening. Same on the other side. Okay, so once that's done, all you're left to do now is actually put your top stitching on. Now, like with this bit, it's up to you if you want to go with the same colour so it blends in, or if you want it to stand out. Obviously I've gone with the navy because I quite like the idea of it standing out, so you can actually see where you're actually putting your pencils or makeup brushes in. Now the only issue is with on this side, and I'll show you on this one's the blue one that I did. When you come to the end, obviously you're going to see your stitching reversing. Now you could either just leave those and hand sew them in, or if you were to do it at the top, you won't see it because it's on the navy, but you will see it on the edge here. So it's up to you how you want to do it. Obviously I've just gone backwards and forwards in that area and tried to keep it as neat as possible. Right, so I have done a centimetre first, so you'll see where, especially with this one because it's a light fabric, so you can see this is still slightly light, darker because it's picking up this blue coming through. So I've done a centimetre stitch which actually goes right on the edge of where it's turned through my seam, and then I brought another one in so it's holding into place a little bit further, and actually it's quite nice. The other thing is where you've got your opening, obviously they'll be held together with your stitching here. But also it just loses it here, and you don't actually have to hand stitch then this seam together. But it's completely up to you how you want to do it. All right. I'm just going to go and sew around and then I'll show you the outcome. Right, so one wrap completely finished. Now just be very careful obviously with your stitching. Mine's gone off actually a little bit, especially on the top stitching, it's gone off just a little bit in the corners. Okay, so one other tip I would suggest is you make sure that you've got plenty of bobbin thread. So because you don't fancy getting halfway through and then going, oh, my bobbin thread's run out, because you're more likely, if you're anything like me, want to unstitch it because you want a perfect stitch around the edge. Okay, so that is one wrap, makeup wrap, or pencil, whatever, complete. Okay. I'm not too sure about the ribbon now actually. There we are. One complete.